Next up in the Jodi Arias murder trial, the jury gets its turn. Arizona, one of only 3 states that allowed jurors to pose questions once the state and defense lawyers have finished. Arias could get the death penalty if this jury doesn't like her answers and decides to convict her. She's accused of stabbing ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander 27 times, shooting him twice in the face, and slashing his throat in a jealous rage. In what has been days of gripping testimony, Arias is now claiming self-defense. That after changing her story at least 2 times. Yesterday, her lawyer gave her a chance to explain why she could not recall answers to some of the prosecution questions. Listen.
Do you have any memories of slashing Mr. Alexander's throat?
No.
When you were asked on cross-examination if you did that, do you recall telling us that you did?
Yes.
Was that a recollection or a logical assumption on your part?
It was definitely not a recollection, so it was just based on the facts that I knew.
Well, right now, the judge and lawyers are poring over more than 100 questions jury members have submitted. The trial is set to resume later today. Let's talk about it with Susan Constantine, a jury consultant, Esther Panich, a criminal defense attorney, and Dan Shore, a former prosecutor. So, Dan, we'll start with you. As a former prosecutor, would you want the jury to ask questions? I mean, doesn't it suggest that you as a prosecutor haven't entirely done your job if they still have questions to be answered?
Well, most states don't allow this, but Arizona does. So it's not a reflection on the prosecutor in this case, and we'll see what they ask. So much of Jodi Arias' testimony did not relate to the actual killing of Travis Alexander. It dealt with the sex life, the alleged abuse. It'll be really interesting to see if the jury focuses on all the other facts or if they zero in on the actual killing and her lies about what happened on that day.
Susan, as a jury consultant, I'm sure you're going to learn a great deal just from the questions that they actually ask.
You really do. Actually, I had a trial here in Orlando. It was a civil trial, and the jurors came back and asked a question that kind of blew the minds of everyone in there, which really gave insight into what that verdict was going to be. So what I'm hearing here is that, you know, we've got jurors that are a little bit frustrated. You know, they've got a lot of questions. Now they're taking control. They're kind of revving up a little bit more, gathering their questions up so they can get some answers. And what we find is those that ask those questions, they come to a more clear verdict because they have more understanding of the evidence that's before them.
Esther, 100 questions. I mean, Jodi Arias has been on the stand for 15 days and still 100 questions?
Yes, I'm really excited to hear what those questions are, because will the actual question not only give us a clue as to what they're thinking, but the tone and tenor of the question will do such as well. Are the questions going to be accusatory, or are they going to be softballs? We're going to know, you know, if the jurors start asking questions about Jodi's upbringing and maybe some trauma from her past, that would give us a clue that they may be interested or maybe able to accept more of a battered women syndrome type defense or self-defense, what may have triggered her that day. If they're accusatory, then obviously, you know, it's more along the lines that they're going to convict. I think it takes, as a trial lawyer, I don't like the idea of jurors asking questions. I like me being able to respond as a defense attorney to what the prosecutors are asking, and that's it. I don't want the jurors to be asking questions because it does take control away from the lawyers in the courtroom. And just like Susan said, sometimes they come up with things that the lawyers in the case have no idea that that's what they're thinking.
So there's the take of a defense attorney. Dan, what about it? Does this, you know, jury questions, does it give advantage to one side or the other?
It doesn't give an advantage to one side or the other, but it will be interesting. Jodi Arias admits now that she killed Travis Alexander, and we know she lied about it, and we know she lied about a lot of other things. So I think it's really clear that she will be convicted, and the big question is, will she get the death penalty? And these questions may give a hint about how jurors are looking at her background, as Esther suggested, and how that will relate to their ultimate decision about whether she gets the death penalty or not.
Susan, she has been on the stand, as we noted, for 15 days. Sometimes, I mean, the thinking is that jurors may have just sort of emotionally bonded with her, even though they don't necessarily like her, and they might not want to put her to death as a result.
Well, you know, if you remember with the Casey Anthony trial, we had the state and the defense completely right across from one another. So they had to look at, the jury had to look at Casey Anthony the entire time. So there is that level of likability that starts to build, that rapport building. But here's the thing, is what I've been hearing in that courtroom is that some of the jurors are just kind of fed up. They're over and done with it. They're ready to make a decision. And so that doesn't always play, because it also can also become an irritant after a while. When you're looking at someone all the time and you're seeing their demeanor change from being this little victim and then being a little condescending back to being a victim again, it's going to be like, wait a minute, something's not, doesn't feel right. So that may not always work for her.
There is, Esther, you know, the story's changed. There are the excuses, the memory lapses. She can't remember what actually happened when he died. I mean, there's an awful lot to this story that the defense is going to have to fight against.
There are some really bad facts here, but the ultimate goal of the defense attorney when you have a death penalty case is to save your client's life. A win in this case is the death penalty not being imposed on Jodi Arias.
And potentially Jodi goes to prison for life. All right, thank you very much. Esther Panich, Susan Constantine, Dan Shore. We'll continue to watch this very interesting case. Thanks.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.